In this episode, I speak with the fabulous Rebecca Edwards. She is going to educate us all around probiotics. She is a bit of a probiotic expert, and we're going to be covering how exactly it is that one of these capsules of white powder can influence our mental state. We're going to bust those myths and all those misconceptions around probiotic use. There are a lot of them, such as, are refrigerated probiotics better than the non-refrigerated ones? Choosing a high quality probiotic, how to know if it's the right probiotic for you and your needs, and where we go wrong with probiotics. So it's an amazing episode, so jam-packed, full of information. You're going to love it. It's all about the mind-gut connection. And without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Rebecca. I'm so happy to have you here. You are such an expert and so knowledgeable around the field of probiotics. So we're very lucky to have you on the Anxiety Reset podcast.
Hi, Georgie. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to join you and your beautiful community to talk about things that I love.
Awesome. So happy you're here. So Rebecca, let's start with like a really open question just to guide us into this whole thing. Is there something about probiotics that you wish more people knew?
Oh my goodness, that is an open question. I suppose the thing that I love to share with people is probably the potential of probiotics. I feel like probiotics they're really well known. Everybody's like, oh, good bugs, but I feel that their kind of general position in the public perception is they're happy bugs that are good for you to take after you've had a tummy bug or after you've had antibiotics. And that's all true. But what I would love people to know is that the potential for probiotics to act as really powerful interventions in significant health concerns is potentially endless. That they're a lot more than just good for your tummy bugs.
Yeah, because we often think of them as specifically in relation to our digestion or like our gut health only, and think that it's like, well, if I have an upset tummy or if I have IBS or I have those kind of like known gut specific conditions going on, that's when I take a probiotic. But there are other instances too where we can benefit. Hey.
Absolutely. And, everything you've said is true. Probiotics are amazing to take after you've had an upset tummy or, if you have IBS. But I guess what I would love people to know is that their influence extends far beyond the digestive system. And, there are particular types of probiotic which can help reduce the recurrence of vaginal thrush, for example. There are particular strains of probiotic bacteria that have been shown to reduce severity of asthma attacks or severity of eczema, or even, contribute to improved mental well-being. So their probiotics are not just for your tummy or your digestive tract. They can do a lot more to support you.
And what I find for my clients in particular is this overlap between anxiety and IBS type symptoms. So they'll often notice that the way that they're feeling mentally and physically with anxiety will impact their bowel motions. They might get diarrhea, or they might get constipation, or mix of both. And so that's one of the reasons why I love probiotics so much. I just wanted to share that as well, is that we can kind of like overlap, and that link between the mind and the gut starts to become clearer. So how is it that a capsule of white powdery stuff can influence how I am feeling in my mental state, in my brain? I want to hear your explanation around this.
Isn't that an amazing question? And yes, I can just picture those little white capsules of goodness. And yes, they look so innocuous and so, tiny and insignificant. And yet the impact they can have can be so, so significant. I guess where I would start there is to say that, bacteria are amazing, and bacteria are really in the driving seat when it comes to everything that we do as functioning organisms. I remember once hearing a wise person say, humans only exist because we're convenient for bacteria. And it's certainly true. I know it's quite creepy, isn't it? It's almost science fiction like, but it's certainly true that we have more cells of bacteria on us and in us than we have human cells. Technically, we are more bacterial than we are human. Just let that sink in for a moment. And so when you think about it like that, it makes sense that not only can bacteria, and probiotics are just kind of a name we give certain types of bacteria, not only can bacteria influence our gut health and our immune health and our mental health, but really they're influencing every single channel of communication within our body and our mind. And you open your mind to it, and it really does become a little bit like a science fiction story. Yeah.
Beautiful. So that's sort of starting to help us link the idea that these bacteria, or if we are enhancing or supporting our bacteria with a white powdery capsule, it's going to affect your mood in some way. And you're affiliated with Activated Probiotics, and it is one of the brands that I really love to use. And you have one product called Biome Lift. What is the research showing us around Biome Lift? It's your strain that's specific more for mood and sleep. What's it telling us at the moment in terms of?
Yes, again, endless question with so much fun to talk about. So yes, you are right that I'm affiliated with Activated Probiotics. I'm the director of education, and I just always love to get that in because I think it's really exciting to talk about education in the science space. And yes, I work for a probiotic company, but we're a probiotic company who really prioritize communication of science and research to people who are interested. Whether that's practitioners, whether that's people like, I know a lot of members of your community, Georgie, are really interested in gut health and wellness in general, and really looking after themselves from every possible angle. And these are the people I love to spend afternoons in deep conversation with, talking about the research behind Biome Lift and other probiotic products. So I guess I'll take a step back first. And I would say, to kind of set the scene a little bit when it comes to probiotics. Again, we've become used to the idea of this word probiotic meaning kind of healthy bacteria. But the way that I would love people to think about probiotics is it's almost like a system of medicine itself, where probiotics is like an umbrella term. And then under that umbrella come literally hundreds of different strains of bacteria. And each one of those strains has its own specific genetic code, which means that it's going to have a different DNA makeup, contain different substances, produce different metabolites or byproducts, all of which have a very particular effect on the individual body. So it's not enough for people to say, oh, I've heard that probiotics are good for mood or sleep or mental health. I will go and get a tub of yogurt, or, I'll walk into my local health food shop or pharmacy and I'll get whatever probiotic is cheapest or on special or has the highest number of bacterial units in it or the highest number of strains. And I'll take that. And now I'm feeding my good gut bacteria, and now I'm going to have a better sleep. It's, we're definitely on the right track there, but it's getting back to that idea of specificity, that we've got to match up the individual specific strains of probiotic bacteria with the research showing us what they're capable of doing. And when it comes to Biome Lift is a combination of 4 specific strains of probiotic, which have been shown when trialed together to have a positive impact on mood and sleep. So I just want to make it, super clear that probiotics are, a whole world of amazing, but it's like, it would be like for any herbalist listening, it would be like saying, herbs are amazing. So I'm going to go into my local health food store and I'm going to buy a bottle of tablets that have herbs in them. And now I've cured everything to do with herbs. You would need to know the individual plants and plant parts and variations of plants to know the exact correct herbal medication that could support your sleep or your mood or your, gallbladder health, liver health, or whatever you're looking to do. So that's a very long-winded answer, Georgie, to saying that Biome Lift is a clinically trialed probiotic product. And these 4 specific strains at this exact dose have now been through 3 randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blind human clinical trials and found to exert a positive impact on a whole range of markers associated with mood and sleep and cognitive function.
Beautiful. And just to quickly translate what that means in terms of the research, that's like really good, thorough, amazing research to show that there is an effect. And I like how you clarified the strains trialed together as well. And that being an important factor, because then there's the other element of, does it work the same if we only have one of those strains, or if we change up the combination somewhat. Right. So each probiotic is so unique and different in terms of what it can do, depending on what that combination looks like.
Yeah, that's right. And also, the dose and the packaging, and it's really, this is why I'm such a big believer in high quality, research really on probiotics and on all therapeutic goods, that we need to have an understanding of, what is my confidence level in taking this product in this exact dose, in this exact formulation, in this exact capsule, in this exact package. And that's why, again, I am such a big believer in really good, strong, gold standard scientific research when it comes to individual health products, for sure.
And so if you're a consumer or a listener of the podcast, walking around in the world and you're thinking, I want to try some probiotics, or I want to get into that, or maybe you've been taking a probiotic for a while, but you're not sure if it's even doing anything. What are some steps we can take in choosing the right probiotic for us?
Such a great question. And again, I think it comes back to this idea of probiotics really being known again under this kind of almost lump sum, description of good bacteria. Yeah. And it's obviously not everybody who has an interest in health or gut health, or even has a need to take a probiotic, is going to be intimately acquainted with the whole stable of these several hundred different strains and immediately know which one to choose. So really the best piece of advice I can give is to see a practitioner who's very well versed in probiotic knowledge and who can prescribe the right strain for you. We're very lucky in Australia that we have a great availability of good quality healthcare products in our health food shops and, pharmacies as well. And so my best advice would be book in with a practitioner to have an individualized one-on-one consultation. Or if that's not within the realms of the immediate future, then go into a really good independent health food shop or a community pharmacy and speak to a qualified practitioner who's well educated in probiotics, who understands strain specificity and how to access research behind the strains, and who can point you in the direction of the product most appropriate for the outcome you want to have. And that's really, I think, the crucial part of this is knowing what you want to get out of a probiotic. And, I talk to a lot of people who say things like, well, I've heard probiotics are good to take, so which one should I take? And the answer there is, well, what do we need to happen? What do we need to see happen in your body? Is there, like you were referring to earlier, Georgie, is there something going on with IBS or constipation or diarrhea or gas production? Or is it more around an immune condition like, seeking an improvement in eczema, or a change to the impact that a skin condition is having on someone's life? For women, often we talk to a lot of women with, vaginal flora imbalances that present as thrush or bacterial vaginosis, recurrent urinary tract infections, and then we can talk about the vaginal microbiome and specific strains that are helpful there. But, probably most relevant to your listeners in your community is what we've touched on a couple of times in this conversation already, the gut-brain axis, this kind of bi-directional channel of communication between, well, it's actually tri-dimensional really, because it's between the brain, the digestive tract itself, or the gut, but also the microbiome. And we're moving into a position in microbiome science where we're really recognizing now that the microbiome, which is the community of all of the microorganisms which live largely in the large intestine, that they're really being recognized as almost a body system or a body organ in their own right. Like, did you know, Georgie, and you possibly do, but it still astounds me to think about it. Did you know that if you isolated all of the bacteria from your digestive tract, it would weigh about 1.5 to 2 kilograms? like that's a lot of bacteria.
Yeah.
It's a lot of
It's a
bacteria.
lot.
That's heavier than your heart. You know, it's
Yeah.
about the same kind of heft as your liver. And how can something that significant not be an organ? So
Mm,
it's very much recognizing the impact that the activity of this microbial organ, if we think about it like that, can have on the functioning of all of the other systems in your body. And, there's now enough conclusive proof really showing us that the composition, the makeup of the microbiome, the types of bugs that live inside you, basically, that this does have a relationship with mental health.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is why I asked you about Biome Lift, because honestly, that is probably my favorite of what of the strains that you work with. But we've kind of touched on the idea that there are some misconceptions in the probiotic world. Are there any that we haven't gone through? Some myths we can bust here?
Oh, how long do we have?
Yeah.
I think the one that I probably get asked more often than any other is, do probiotics need to be refrigerated?
I knew you were
And
going to ask that. I knew you were going to
yes,
ask that
yes,
question.
exactly. And the answer is no, they don't. And
Mhm.
the reason for that is that with sophisticated production of modern probiotic products, what we're taking when we take that little magic white capsule of super powder that looks so innocuous and yet is so powerful, what we're actually taking is billions of bacteria which are alive but technically asleep. They're in a state of deep dormancy. I always kind of describe them as being like sleeping beauty. They're deeply asleep, but they're very much alive. They're just not really doing anything. And they're put into this state of dormancy through a process of freeze drying, which is where the bacterial cells have all of the moisture from inside their cellular environment removed. And it's removing this moisture, this freeze drying, which puts them into this state of sleeping beautiness or, deep dormancy. And they will stay alive, asleep, but alive for literally years on end, as long as they stay dry. As soon as they become wet or are exposed to moisture, then they return from their sleeping beauty state into a state of more active metabolism. So a state where all of the processes, the bacterial processes within the cell, basically wake up and need fuel and need an environment to live in which is hospitable to them. And if they don't have that fuel to consume and they don't have that healthy environment, then they will die. So the biggest thing with probiotics is not keeping them cold. They're not actually that temperature sensitive. I mean, think about it. How do you sterilize something? You boil it for at least 4, 6, 8, 10 minutes. That's how you kill bacteria. They actually need exposure to really high temperatures for quite a long time. And just being in someone's kitchen in, modern day room temperature Australia is not going to kill any bacteria. So it's not about temperature, but it is very much about moisture exposure. And this is why, getting back to something that we do at Activated Probiotics, this is why packaging is so important, because even the moisture in humidity can, in the air, can be enough to start reducing the viability or the number of bacteria which are in that state of dormancy. So the most important thing with your probiotics, don't worry about keeping them in the fridge, but keep them dry. And that's, I think, where packaging comes into play. And it kind of leads into another kind of idea that's really important to me, which is the idea of patient success or consumer success. Like I want people to feel better when they take their probiotics, and the number one thing that has to happen is they have to actually take their probiotics in the first place. And honestly, if they're buried in the back of the fridge, it can be really hard to remember when they're not in your line of vision. And it's for the same reason. This kind of leads into another kind of myth or question that people have about probiotics, which is, is there an ideal time of the day to take them? Is it better to take them in the morning so they can kind of be working along with your food during the day? Is it better to take them overnight so they can get to work while you're asleep? Is it better to take them with food so that, they're kind of passing through the digestive tract with food? Is it better to take them on an empty stomach so that there's less acid in the stomach and they're less likely to be destroyed by acid? I've heard all of these statements and all of these questions.
Or
And
taking them with the prebiotics, like
yes,
taking
that's
the
right. Yes,
fiber
that's
so
what
you
we
can
get too. Yeah,
feed them along the way.
Absolutely. That's something we hear a lot, actually. People saying, oh, I've read somewhere that probiotics are useless unless you take them with a prebiotic. Is that true? And, the answer to that one is a categorically no, that's not true, because of all the clinical trials. Another reason I'm such a fan of clinical trials, all the clinical trials on probiotic products, most of them have been done without a prebiotic, and yet we still see these really dazzling results. So we know that probiotics work without a specific prebiotic. But getting back to this idea around timing, again, when we have a really good look at all of the good quality published research on the clinical outcomes of probiotics, we find that timing doesn't make any clinical difference. So again, because I'm such a big fan of success and achievement, your probiotic will work if you take it. And that means, for practitioners, I'm always saying to practitioners, don't place unnecessary barriers up for your patients, and for consumers as well, for people who are, buying a probiotic because they're interested in the outcome. Set yourself up for success. Don't create unnecessary rules around taking it with breakfast or lunch or without a meal or last thing at night, etc. Just take it. Just take it.
I love that. And I would say for me, especially the last 12 months being traveling around so much, not having to keep probiotics in the fridge means I can actually take my probiotics with me.
Yes.
And it makes it so flexible for travel and that kind of thing. Whereas something like fish oil actually is quite heat sensitive and does need to be
kept. Absolutely. Because, you've got a risk with fish oil of the oils going rancid, but probiotics, they're already bacteria. They're not going to grow any more bacteria, so they're not, rancidity is not a risk there. The risk really is in not taking them.
Yeah. Do probiotics colonize the gut? When we take a probiotic, is it going to strengthen and enhance my microbiome?
Such a good question. And I have two ways of answering that. The first is, it's kind of going back a long time, the first, that what we used to say about probiotics, kind of when I was first learning about them 20, 25 years ago, the terminology that we used to use then was, probiotics are like seeds that you plant in your microbiome to grow a healthier microbiome. Or you might talk about probiotics in terms of, I've had a tummy bug or I've had antibiotics, I've wiped out all of my good bacteria, so I'm taking some probiotics to put good bacteria back into my microbiome. And all of that is not quite true. But the second part of your question, can you take probiotics to strengthen and enhance your microbiome? That is true, but in a different way. So probiotics are not colonizing inside of us. They are not becoming part of our microbiome. They are adding to the health of our microbiome, and they are making it more diverse and better balanced, but they do that not by becoming part of it. An analogy that I always use here is to say that taking probiotics is like having builders in to renovate your house. They come in and they fix everything up, they make the walls nice and smooth, and they repaint and they move things around, and then they leave.
Very well-behaved, tidy builders.
Yeah, exactly. I know I said this to someone once. I said, it's having the builders come in and they make everything better and they tidy up and they leave. And she said, well, you haven't seen the state of my house after we had renovations. But, let's go with the analogy here. That they're coming in, they're, making renovations, making the place better, and then they leave. But they've left you with a beautiful house that is so lovely to live in, and you can't wait to show it off. So you have lots of parties and you invite all of your friends and family around to see this beautiful house. And that's really what they're doing. When you take a probiotic, the bacteria are interacting with the local environment, so the surface of the lining of your digestive tract. They're interacting with your immune cells to help regulate the release of various cytokines or, immune system proteins and hormones. And there's a lot of evidence now that specific strains of probiotics can certainly support what we refer to as immune balance or immune tolerance, can help your immune system to behave more appropriately. In other words, they can help to reduce the production of particular inflammatory cytokines, to create a more anti-inflammatory state. They can talk to cells lining the mucous membrane interior of your digestive tract and encourage them to produce more mucus. And this sounds gross, but when you have a thicker mucin lining, the kind of protective substance which coats the mucous membrane that makes up your digestive tract lining. A thicker mucin lining is associated with a whole range of more positive outcomes, reduced incidence of IBS type symptoms, reduced likelihood of gastritis and inflammatory damage to the lining of the digestive tract, lots of positive outcomes there. And we know that, again, taking probiotics leads to a more diverse and healthier microbiome by making the environment a nicer place to be, basically.
Love that. So such a beautiful metaphor, and that's a really great description for it. In terms of our, we were talking a little bit more about strain specificity.
No, it's so fun to say that, isn't it? Yeah.
Strain specificity. Yes, got it. And, needing to take the right probiotic for you in order to get the result you want. Can we go wrong with this? And just use like a really blatant, obvious, like weird example. If a man was taking a probiotic specific for women's like vaginal thrush, for example, is that going to be a bad thing? Is there a safety issue?
Well, he's not going to grow a vagina to begin with. If only it was so simple. But it's actually such a fascinating topic, because question we get asked again a lot is, how can taking one of these, again, these magical white capsules full of powder, how can swallowing one of these have an impact on vaginal health, on thrush? How can taking an oral supplement help the vagina? And this is where it gets really fun, that the leading hypothesis, the community of microbes that lives in women's genitourinary region, is that the vaginal microbiome essentially is heavily influenced and probably seeded from the gastrointestinal microbiome itself. That particular communities of microbes actually migrate from the opening of the digestive tract around the rectum to the vaginal opening, and then the specific attributes of the vaginal environment encourage the colonization and growth of particular species of lactobacillus in particular. So a man taking vaginal probiotics, what he's actually taking is still gastrointestinal bacteria, which still live in a healthy human digestive tract. And it's certainly not going to cause any negative impact on a man's genitourinary health or any aspect of a man's health, actually. In terms of, probiotic supplements for humans, there's not really, I don't really like the terms good and bad when we're talking about bacteria or microbes, but to be very, very simple, there's not really any bad bacteria. There are probably some situations where some people may find that particular probiotic supplements don't suit them. But overall, what the research shows us is that what some people may experience when they take a probiotics, sometimes we hear reports of bloating or abdominal discomfort. Overwhelmingly, the research tells us that this is temporary, and that these, symptoms will settle down and will resolve with time. So it's a very broad answer, but most of the time, probiotics are a really low risk product to take, and the risk of harm or negative outcome is extremely low.
I have a left of field question for you that
my favorite
has occurred in my brain, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this, whether we have information or research around it. Considering that a probiotic capsule, we can take that and it can have an impact on our microbiome. We also know that we interact with each other's microbiomes as human beings living together. If we're living in close quarters with someone with a healthier microbiome or a less healthy microbiome, do we know much information around how that might influence our own microbiome?
That is such a good question. Such a good question. So there's some emerging evidence here. I think we're really just standing on the brink of an explosion of research into kind of interpersonal microbiome communication. But there is now a building body of evidence emerging that, yes, when we live with people, we can influence the composition of each other's microbiomes. And we certainly know that people who have more contact with other humans, and actually with animals as well, will have a more diverse microbiome. We also know that children can broaden their microbiome and gain a more diverse microbiome through contact with other children. So children who attend childcare, for example, generally have a more diverse microbiome than children who don't. Children who spend time with grandparents have a more diverse microbiome than children who don't, because they're essentially coming into contact with the microbes which have been accumulated across long lives, and can be influenced in that way. But to get back to your question in terms of, is it possible that someone with a less balanced microbiome may have a negative impact on someone with a healthier microbiome? I don't think we have the evidence there, but I'm going to say I don't think so, because generally someone with a microbiome of a more favorable composition is more likely to have a gastrointestinal or mucous membrane environment that's capable of supporting a more diverse microbiome. And I would say that they're going to be less likely to see their microbiome shift in a negative direction. It's probably what I would say there. But absolutely open to seeing research on this, and I hope that there is some more coming out over the next few years.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And I appreciate you riffing on that. Also, it brings to mind to me, through the pandemic, with all of our social isolating, one of the things I was concerned about, just sitting back and observing the whole situation, was whether that might have an impact on our microbiomes. And I'm not sure if there's any research around that yet. Have you seen anything, Rebecca?
Not yet, not specific to COVID lockdown, but when we think about what we already know about microbiome communication, then I think we can make some hypotheses for sure. Like I was saying before, children who attend childcare and have regular contact with grandparents have a more diverse microbiome. And these were two things that weren't happening for a lot of people over the last few years. So I think we can safely hypothesize that, absence of community contact is likely to have a negative impact on microbiome diversity. I think it's too soon again to really see what the possible impact of this could be. Again, we can hypothesize from what we already know. We know that, children especially who are exposed to more microbial diversity in their first few years of life are less likely to develop any of what we call the atopic conditions. So that's eczema, that's hay fever, that's asthma, that's food allergies and pet allergies and any other allergies. Again, we don't have any kind of solid published research yet, but it's definitely something that I've thought about for sure. What's the impact on reduced community contact on a developing immune system, especially?
And I love it when the science sort of supports what we already feel, that we are meant to be communal beings and connect with one another. And, there are so many other impacts as well that we know from isolating ourselves and loneliness, and how that can affect us on a mental, emotional level. So the fact that there's that real impact on our microbiomes and our physical systems too is just so fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And, it's just what you've just said has actually reminded me of a really, really interesting study. And it was an animal study, but all research now generally starts its research journey with animal communities, sadly, where researchers found that mice that were bred especially to have a very low microbiome burden, so a very small number of bacteria in their intestines, and would then further put through an antiseptic process, so essentially given very high dose broad spectrum antibiotics to essentially make them as sterile as possible, exhibited symptoms of mental ill health. And the symptoms of depression and anxiety in mice are very behavioral and observed. And researchers then found, when they introduced microbiome material from humans with a healthy microbiome, what they found is that this had a corrective impact on the behavior of the mice. So they kind of went from a state of low or almost no bacteria in their microbiome to a state where their microbiome could be colonized by healthy bacteria, and their behavior patterns were observed to be more consistent with happy, healthy mice. And, that's an animal study, it's observational, and, these are considered to be less important in the scientific world than the whole double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized human clinical trial. But it definitely gives us a little window of understanding into what the impact of very low diversity in the microbiome could look like.
And I think we have to take that into context too, that ethically, could we do that to human beings, like eradicate their microbiome and then just to see how depressed they get? Like, it's not okay.
That's never going to pass any kind of ethics committee approval. No.
Yeah. So on that note, the people who have had some significant events happen perhaps early in life that might have impacted their microbiome diversity, such as perhaps they were cesarean born versus a vaginal birth, which impacts how their microbiome starts out in early life, or perhaps they've had to, in their early years, take a lot of different courses of antibiotics for certain illnesses, whatever might have happened. Does this individual need to take a probiotic every day for the rest of their life?
Again, a brilliant question. And again, I'm going to say I would look at it from an individualized perspective. So as always, my questions are around what's the presentation of this person, what's going on for them clinically, what needs to change or what needs to happen, and what do we know about individual strains of probiotic bacteria which could help with this. So if we have someone, who was delivered by cesarean section rather than vaginal birth, it's not a straight black and white question of, babies born by cesarean section, therefore, will have a lower exposure to healthy bacteria during the birthing process and will have damaged immune system and will have this, that, and the other. It's not that black and white. What we see now is that, we've always got to take a multifactorial look at things. And yes, initially, there is a change in the microbiome composition or a difference when we look at the microbiome composition between infants born via cesarean section and infants vaginally born, but it's what happens afterwards that has the biggest influence on the development of the microbiome. And for example, we know that infants born via cesarean section who are then exclusively breastfed, their microbiome will return to what we think of as biologically typical quite soon, actually. And they are more likely to present with, again, what we currently think of is a more typical microbiome maturation journey than, for example, an infant who is vaginally delivered, but then fed formula milk rather than, mother's breast milk. So it's always looking at the context. Then, for example, lots of other factors we know can influence the development of the microbiome. You mentioned antibiotics. Antibiotics are really interesting, actually, because we see that while an individual may take antibiotics and not notice any particular side effects or negative outcomes there, apart from obviously the resolution of an infection, the reason they took the antibiotics, what we can see when we look at the big picture on a population level is that children who have been exposed to antibiotics in their first few years of life have a statistically significant increased likelihood of an allergic condition being diagnosed before the age of about 7. And the really startling statistic that I know of is that, children who are given antibiotics before the age of 2 years have a 50% increased risk of being diagnosed with asthma by the time they're 7. I mean, does this mean that we shouldn't give antibiotics to children under 2? Absolutely not. Antibiotics, can be a really important intervention in a nasty infection. But what it does mean is that we might need to think a little bit more about how anything that alters the normal course of a microbiome maturing may then require the input of certain strains and species of bacteria, which we know can have a corrective or balancing impact on the development of the microbiome. So I think, again, we're in a state where we need to see more research, but we've got a pretty good idea of what we think is going on.
I really respect that answer. And thank you for, highlighting the gray area in this, because I think particularly as naturopaths, we're often trained into a bit of black and white thinking. It's like, oh, cesarean born, you're going to have a terrible microbiome, like certain things like that. Or if you've had some kind of challenging situation early in life, which there are so many factors to it. And I would like to just add, from my hypnotherapy perspective, I see brilliant results in people's digestive systems based on subconscious mind work and the thoughts that we're thinking. So that's another sort of whole element to consider in the puzzle, and just one of many. So
Oh, absolutely. And all those deep-seated emotions that I'm sure you reach during hypnotherapy sessions, etc., that you're speaking to there, deep-seated emotions are so powerful. And especially, I'm sure you'll agree with me, especially around things like guilt and shame. And
yes.
when it comes to parenting, especially, there's no guilt like mother guilt. And it's something that I always want to talk to parents about, and especially mothers. If your baby was delivered via cesarean section, you didn't fail your baby. You did not damage your beautiful, perfect baby and her beautiful immune system. It's not a sin that you have committed. It's not something you've done wrong. You are not to blame for anything. It's always, this is the science that we know right now. And something that I always love to say to people is there's always something we can do. There's always something we can do. And I'm very happy to share with your listeners, Georgie, my son was born via cesarean section, and I don't feel that I failed him. Like, I literally had no other option. He and I were not going anywhere if he didn't come out, and he couldn't get out. So there was only one way out, via the sunroof. And that's just the way that he was born. And it's, I don't hold guilt on that. And what I do, though, is think about all the ways that I can nourish his microbiome, in everyday life. And your microbiome doesn't stop and end on the day you were born. That's just the beginning.
Yeah.
And the same way, I'd really like to say to parents whose kids have had lots of antibiotics, whose kids have had formula, these are not failures, and this is not dooming anyone's microbiome composition or immune outcome at all. These are just little pieces of information that we know in the jigsaw puzzle of life. And guess what? We've got much bigger pieces that we can use to create a healthier microbiome, or the best immune outcome for everybody.
I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much for sharing that personal piece too, Rebecca, because it's just, there's going to be so many people listening to that who really needed that message. In terms of supporting oneself, if we do need to take a course of antibiotics, what are your thoughts around that and the use of probiotics? Because there's been a lot of things around, like, don't take the probiotics with the antibiotics because the antibiotics will cancel out the probiotics. Where do you sit on that piece?
Yeah, again, such a great question. All the good questions, Georgie. And it's a really big one. And I think though, it's not a simple black and white topic. And it comes back to, again, this idea of good and bad bacteria, and the idea of probiotics colonizing the microbiome, and all of these kind of myths, or these half-truths that science has really shown us recently, we need to think of in a bit of a more nuanced way. And the whole relationship between antibiotics and probiotics is a really great example there. That antibiotics are designed, they are substances which release antibacterial metabolites. So, what I mean by that is, when you take an antibiotic capsule, you swallow it, but it actually doesn't go through your intestinal tract. Orally taken antibiotics don't pass through your microbiome. They're designed to get into your bloodstream as soon as possible, because most of the time, the infection that you're taking antibiotics to treat is not in your intestinal tract. The number one reason antibiotics are prescribed in Australia is for bronchitis, or, a chest infection, or a sinus infection. And this means that the antibiotics that you swallow, they need to get into your blood so that they can travel into your lungs and into your sinuses and into your throat and kill the bacteria which are causing you problems. So the journey of an antibiotic, when you swallow it, it goes through the stomach acid, and then it immediately is absorbed across the wall of the top part of the intestinal tract, which is well above your microbiome. So your antibiotic goes into your bloodstream before it comes into contact with your microbiome. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have a negative impact on the microbiome, because all the blood in your body flows through every part of your body, including the lining of the digestive tract, which is where your microbiome lives. But the negative impact on the microbiome is probably not as drastic as some people, I think, picture it to be. I've had a lot of people say to me, well, taking antibiotics is like setting off an atomic bomb, and it, just nukes your entire microbiome. And it's really not. We do see a reduction in the number and diversity of bacteria in the digestive tract microbiome, but it's by no means a nuclear wasteland. But the other part of the story is what probiotics are doing. If you and I have mentioned earlier, probiotics are not growing inside us, then why would we need to take them when we're taking antibiotics if they're not putting back bacteria which has been lost? And they're not. What they are doing, though, is they're actually protecting our microbiome and our immune system from potential negative impact of taking antibiotics. So the most common side effects of antibiotics are some often short-term diarrhea during and immediately afterwards taking antibiotics, or for women, vaginal thrush, or for, often older people or babies, oral thrush. And what's going on with this diarrhea and this thrush outbreak is pretty much the same thing, which is that it's an opportunistic overgrowth of other microbes. So in the case of thrush, it's an overgrowth of Candida, a species of, or a genus of yeast, which can cause, overgrowth and infections. In the context of diarrhea, what you've got going on is an overgrowth of communities of bacteria which have an osmotic draw, which means that essentially they're pulling water into the digestive tract and creating this like loose, urgent bowel movement. So what probiotics are doing is they're actually trying to protect your microbiome from this overgrowth of microbes. And they do this by essentially occupying space on the wall of the digestive tract so that the Candida yeasts or the E. coli or the other bacteria actually don't have, think about it like setting up tents. They don't have any campground to pitch their tent. And if they can't get their tent set up, they can't, bring their family out to play. And that's what probiotics are doing. They're essentially taking up all the ground in the campground so that these, opportunists can't come and set up their tents and then wreak havoc on the harmony of the camping ground. So probiotics are protecting us from these short-term side effects by passing through the digestive tract, occupying space on the gastrointestinal wall, and reducing the likelihood of these less than helpful microbes from overgrowing. That's the first thing they're doing. They're doing a few other things as well. They can actually help to protect some of our own microbiome from the negative impact of having these antibacterial substances in the bloodstream. But on a longer term plan, if you like, they're also interacting with our immune system to, we spoke earlier about the ability of some strains of probiotics in helping to enhance immune balance. And one of the reasons that I'm really keen on recommending probiotics during antibiotics is to work with your immune system to make it less likely that you're going to need antibiotics again in the near future. So they're doing lots of really important things, which are not as simple as putting healthy bacteria in. And then to get back to, sorry, I'm talking way too much here, but to get back to the beginning of your question, when I was talking about antibiotics going into your bloodstream, this is another myth that needs to be put to bed, that we used to think that you shouldn't take probiotics and antibiotics at the same time, and I still hear people say you need to separate them by at least 2 hours, and you really don't, because they're going in different places. The antibiotics are going into your blood and the probiotics are staying in your digestive tract. So it's not, it's no longer considered to be important, and there's no evidence suggesting that there is any benefit in separating probiotics and antibiotics as well.
As I'm listening to this beautiful explanation, I just have such a grin on my face because I'm so grateful to have your wisdom, Rebecca. I'm going to wrap us up with one last question. If we do experience, we were talking about protecting our microbiome from damage and losing that diversity. If we do have something that ends up damaging our microbiome, and we do lose our species diversity or our population numbers, do we ever get that back?
Oh,
if we're
that's a
not
big
adding
question.
in,
Yeah.
if we're not adding in more probiotics?
So there are a few hypotheses around this. And at this point, I don't think we can say for sure. But what we hypothesize is that essentially we each kind of almost have our own kind of bacterial blueprint or set point, our own unique microbiome balance. And the leading hypothesis is that this is the point that we're likely to return to even after a disturbance in the microbiome. So after taking antibiotics, after having an awful gastrointestinal infection, after a massive diet change, we're likely to be returning to something, something really resembling that initial kind of point of your unique balance. Having said that, though, your microbiome is constantly changing, constantly. And this is one of the things that makes microbiome science so challenging, is that there is currently no understanding of what the ideal human microbiome looks like. And by that, I'm talking about the gastrointestinal microbiome. We actually have a pretty good understanding of what a healthy vaginal microbiome looks like, for example. We are learning a lot more about what a healthy oral microbiome looks like, so communities in the mouth. But the gastrointestinal microbiome, honestly, right now, that's anyone's guess. Science has a pretty good idea of what particular patterns might mean. So the presence or absence of, groups of bacteria, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. We can know that, there are some patterns we see in people with particular diseases or in people who are particularly healthy. But in terms of knowing what the ideal individual microbiome is, we really don't. And so it's very hard to know exactly what's going on inside any one individual at any time. So that it gets a very rambly answer, Georgie, but I'm going to say that I think the leading idea right now is that we each have our own version of microbial balance. And just like that concept of homeostasis, that our body is always working back towards this point of balance, I suspect that there is a microbiome homeostasis point as well that our bodies are working towards too.
And perhaps with the right probiotic, we can support it to reach that or go back to that homeostasis faster.
Yeah, that's right. That, particular strains of probiotics can really help to support a healthier environment where our own healthy microbiome is able to flourish and establish itself.
Oh, so brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm so, so happy that we had the chance to speak to you. Now, for those who are listening and they are just minds blown from all this amazing wisdom and they want to know more, where can they get more information and learn more about what you have to offer?
Well, come along to the Activated Probiotics website, which is activatedprobiotics.com.au. And also, if you use Instagram or Facebook, have a look at our social media. We put up lots of fun little videos where we talk about really geeky things like you and I have been talking about, taking probiotics with antibiotics, how probiotics can help with skin health and immune health and various things like that. So if you are a little bit of a bacterial nerd like I am and like you might be, Georgie, then you can access lots more fun information and science on both our website and our social media.
Amazing. We'll put that information in the show notes so people can find it nice and easily. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your wisdom and also your dedication to correcting those myths and really advancing our understanding of probiotics and the microbiome. I appreciate it so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Georgie. It's really, really lovely to connect with your beautiful community. And, thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to announce my new book, The Anxiety Reset Method, is now available in bookstores across Australia. It's on booktopia.com and Book Depository if you're international. This book will help you create the resilience you need to thrive and keep that anxious mind in check. Broken down into weekly attainable goals, the Anxiety Reset Method will take you on a journey to show you that you really can master that anxious mind. Thank you for listening. We have reached the end of this episode. If you enjoy this podcast and you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe or share this episode on your Instagram stories and make sure you tag @Georgie the naturopath. But that is all for today. Please be kind to yourselves. Know that you are enough and you are exactly where you need to be.